Imagine you wake up at 2 in the morning and walk into the kitchen. There is a refrigerator humming, a spoon in the sink, one chair wearing a shirt for reasons nobody remembers, and suddenly the ordinary fact that all of this exists feels completely bizarre. Why is there anything at all? Why is there a universe with chairs and atoms and badly organized kitchens, rather than absolutely nothing? The first answer is also the least satisfying. Perhaps reality simply exists. No cause, no deeper reason. The cosmic explanation form ends with a large blank box marked, "That's just how it is." But before rejecting that answer, we need to notice something uncomfortable. Every possible explanation seems to end somewhere. The real dispute is not whether explanation stops, it is where, and whether the stopping point actually explains anything. Picture reality as a warehouse. We are doing the final inventory. Inside, we find galaxies, fields, particles, people, several billion missing socks, and perhaps things we have not discovered yet. The question is not why one particular box is on one particular shelf. It is why there is a warehouse, an inventory, or anything to count. This is easy to confuse with a scientific question about the early universe. Cosmology can investigate how the universe developed from earlier physical conditions. It can describe expansion, matter, radiation, and the structure of space-time. That is astonishing work, but even a complete physical history would not automatically answer our question. Suppose a scientist explains every present box in the warehouse by showing which earlier box it came from. We can still ask why the whole warehouse exists. The Big Bang is not simply a moment when a black, empty room suddenly exploded. A black room would already contain space, darkness, physical conditions, and apparently a very relaxed observer waiting for something to happen. That is not nothing. A quantum vacuum is not absolute nothing either. It is a physical state described using fields, mathematical structures, and laws. Calling it nothing is like opening an apparently empty refrigerator and ignoring the refrigerator. Absolute nothing would contain no matter, energy, space, time, laws, possibilities, causes, or background stage. Not even a tiny sign saying, "Nothing to see here." This matters because people often imagine nothing as a simple default. First, there is an empty stage. Then we need an explanation for why the furniture arrived. But the empty stage is already furniture. If you enjoy careful thinking accompanied by deeply irresponsible drawing, subscribe. The stick figures have no other career prospects. Now consider the ordinary way explanations work. Why is the window broken? Because a football hit it. Why did the football hit it? Because someone kicked badly. Why did they kick badly? Because their technique consisted mainly of optimism. Each answer points to something else. This creates a chain of explanation. When we ask why anything exists, we appear to be asking for an explanation of the entire chain. One possible answer is that the chain goes back forever. Every event has an earlier explanation, with no first event. An infinite chain may sound impossible, but merely being infinite does not make it incoherent. The negative numbers continue without a first negative number. For every negative number, there is another before it. Still, critics say an infinite chain would only explain each link using another link. It would not explain why the chain exists at all. Imagine an infinite line of stick figures, each holding up the person in front. When asked what supports the line, every figure points backward. Locally, each figure has an answer. Globally, the whole arrangement still looks suspicious. Defenders of the infinite chain can reply that this demand may be unfair. If every member is explained, perhaps there is no additional object called the whole chain, requiring its own explanation. After all, every brick in a wall can be small while the wall is enormous. Properties of the parts do not always transfer to the whole. Likewise, even if each thing depends on something else, it does not immediately follow that reality as a whole depends on something else. Another approach says explanation must end in something necessary. A necessary being or necessary reality is something that could not have failed to exist. Everything else is contingent, meaning it exists but could have been absent or different. Your chair is contingent. It could have been a stool. You are contingent. A slightly different meeting, decision, or biological history, and you would not be here. The argument says that a reality made entirely from contingent things never explains why there is any reality at all. So perhaps something exists necessarily and provides the foundation for everything else. Avicenna, Aquinas, Leibniz, and many later philosophers developed different versions of this general idea. These arguments should not be blended into one philosophical smoothie. Some focus on causes, others focus on dependence, contingency, or the need for a sufficient reason. The principle of sufficient reason is the idea that contingent facts have an adequate explanation for why they obtain rather than not. If that principle applies to the whole contingent universe, then the final explanation cannot be another contingent item inside the warehouse. It must be something that does not depend on anything else. Many theists identify this necessary foundation with God. That avoids the childish objection, then who created God? The proposed answer is precisely that God is not the sort of being that begins or requires an external cause. But this does not settle the argument. Critics can ask whether the concept of a necessary being is coherent, whether such a being is genuinely possible, and whether defining something as necessary gives us any reason to think it exists. We can define a necessary dragon as a dragon that cannot fail to exist. The warehouse remains disappointingly dragon-free. There is also a gap between establishing some necessary foundation and establishing the God of a particular religion. Even if a cosmological argument succeeds, further argument is needed to show that this foundation is personal, intelligent, good, or interested in human dietary rules. And if a necessary being freely creates a contingent universe, another question appears. Why this universe? Why these laws, these galaxies, and this chair wearing that shirt? The answer might appeal to intention or value, but then the argument has moved beyond simply proving that some foundation exists. A third option is the brute fact. A brute fact is a fact with no deeper explanation. Reality exists, full stop. This can sound like giving up. Yet defenders argue that demanding an explanation for everything may be a habit learned from events inside the universe, then improperly applied to existence as a whole. Within the warehouse, boxes arrive through loading doors. It does not follow that the warehouse itself arrived through a larger loading door. Bertrand Russell famously defended the general thought that the universe might simply be there. The point is not that curiosity is foolish, it is that reality has no obligation to match our preference for complete explanations. Critics reply that accepting a brute universe too quickly weakens the very impulse that drives inquiry. Again and again, things once treated as basic have turned out to have deeper explanations. But that is a reason to keep looking, not proof that a final explanation exists. Science succeeds by seeking explanations within nature. It does not follow that nature as a whole must have one. There is also a subtle problem for the necessary being view. It too seems to stop with something unexplained. Its defender will say the necessary foundation is not an arbitrary brute fact. It exists by necessity. The critic replies that this may replace "the universe just exists" with "the necessary foundation just necessarily exists." Whether that is progress depends on whether necessity genuinely explains existence or merely gives the stopping point a more expensive label. One final possibility turns the original question around. Maybe nothing was never the obvious alternative. We tend to treat nothing as simpler because it contains fewer things, but simplicity does not automatically mean possibility, probability, or priority. To say that nothing was the default, we would need some account of what made it the default. We cannot say nothing was stable. Stability requires time, laws, and possible changes. Absolute nothing has none of those. We cannot say something emerged from nothing because nothing cannot wait, fluctuate, decay, choose, or produce. The moment it gains a mechanism, it has joined the inventory. Some philosophers therefore ask whether an entirely empty reality is even possible. Perhaps there must be logical truths, mathematical facts, possibilities, or some concrete foundation. Others deny that abstract truths count as existing things in the relevant sense. Even if numbers exist necessarily, numbers do not obviously manufacture galaxies. So the question divides into several questions. Does every contingent fact need an explanation? Can the whole be explained by its parts? Is an infinite regress enough? Is necessary existence real or merely verbal? Is absolute nothing genuinely possible? None has an agreed answer. And that may reveal why this question feels different from an ordinary puzzle. We are trying to stand outside the entire warehouse while still using tools found inside it. Cause, time, possibility, logic, and explanation are already pieces of reality. Perhaps there is a necessary foundation. Perhaps reality is an infinite structure. Perhaps the universe is a brute fact. Perhaps the demand for a total explanation asks more of explanation than explanation can provide. But the strangest possibility is the one we began by taking for granted. Maybe existence is not the interruption of nothing. Maybe nothing is the idea requiring an explanation.